Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about where the satellite industry is headed, especially as it relates to mobile applications. I am your host for today, Lisa Dreyer, and I am really excited to introduce our guest, Brian Barnett. He is the founder and CEO of Solstar Space. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for making time for this. Maybe we can start by having you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and Soulstar Space.
Sure. I've been in the mobile satellite industry since 1999. I started my first satellite company then called SatWest. And before that, I started my career at NASA, and I worked on developing payloads that flew on the space shuttle and the space lab. And I worked in astronaut training and was training to be a crew interface coordinator when I left NASA for the private sector, which is the air to ground link between the ground and the astronauts. And began working as a management consultant with KPMG after I left NASA, after I went to business school. And that's where I was introduced to the mobile satellite services industry in the 90s, because that's when the first wave of all of these commercial satellite networks were starting to be launched. And so that's why I decided that it would probably be a good time to start a company in this industry when I did back in 1999. And so Solstar Space is my third satellite related company. And we are focusing specifically on using commercial satellite networks to provide communications on orbit for people and things that are in orbit. So that's our particular niche.
That's great. Well, it sounds like an amazing background that you have. I'm really interested to just get an update on Soulstar's offerings today.
Solstar Space, we're continuing to work on products relating to enabling the services for for using satellite communications in space. And so, but also, of course, we're well known as the company that's working on the first commercial Wi-Fi for use in space. And so we're very busy on developing these capabilities, including on the lunar surface and lunar orbit, because there's a lot of activity that as NASA is going back to the moon, and so there's a lot of activity out there, and people need Wi-Fi, right? You need it on the moon just like you need it here on Earth. So that's keeping us very busy as well.
Wow. So, what would you say are some of the key trends in the mobile satellite industry that are really driving the direction of Soulstar Space and kind of where you're headed?
So the key drivers for us are that the industry is kind of catching up to what we've been pointing out for quite a long time, in that we're using commercial satellite networks to provide communications in space. And so, because of my background in the arena in terms of working for NASA before and using government satellites, we were really curious about if we could use commercial satellites for on-orbit communications. And so, we received our first NASA Space Act agreement in 2013, and to test this whole idea out, we're using commercial space networks to connect to rockets and spacecraft. And so now the industry, that's exactly what's happening, is that NASA's retiring its satellites that they've used since the 80s, the tracking and data relay satellites. Those are being retired, and those are the key satellites that have provided communications for the space shuttle program, but also now for the International Space Station. And so that TDRS system is provided the key communications to enable to control and interact with the space station, as well as spacecraft that are heading to the space station and back. And so those satellites are going away. And so besides NASA needing commercial services now, it's just the whole industry. There's so many satellites being launched now, and so many launches that
Yeah.
that's the key industry happenings that are affecting our business in a positive way.
Absolutely. So, what do you see as some of the primary use cases that will be, like, I guess, leveraging Solstar Space products and solutions?
So one good example are commercial space stations. So as the International Space Station is being retired, then commercial space stations are taking their place. And so there's a number of those in works now. And it's just a good example of where you can use Solstar's satellite services. In other words, you have both on space stations, you have people, astronauts, and tourists, more and more tourists, as well as scientific payloads and instruments. And all of those need our Wi-Fi capability for the Wi-Fi enabled payloads, but also for the astronauts and tourists who want to use their want to take their phones up there and attach or get hooked up to the internet. And so those are the services that we're developing in terms of you have a satellite link on the commercial space station enabled by the products that we're developing to provide the service on board. And then, just like any other hotel or airplane, then you have Wi-Fi on board to be able to connect to the internet. So I think it's kind of humorous that we're providing satellite internet on satellites per se, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So in theory, if I am an astronaut working on the space station, I could just use my mobile phone, my smartphone to, I guess, work with, I don't know, experiments on board, or what else? What might I use that for as I'm in space? Or could I connect directly to Earth using my smartphone?
Yeah, so it should be as easy for you to get online in space as it is here. So Solstar, we take care of all that for you, so you don't have to worry about it. You log into the Solstar hotspot that will be available to you on a space station, for instance. Then you're online. So we're basically helping to create what we're calling a space wide web and connecting that to the World Wide Web. So yes, it would be that you could use your phone to call your friends and family, or just get online and you're online. So you can interact with any other website or send emails and that sort of thing. And to you, the user on board, it will be the same as doing it on Earth.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what would be some of the, I guess, less common uses for this mobile satellite connectivity in space?
I think everything we're doing is somewhat unusual because we're using commercial satellites for new applications. But one application is if you have a Solstar space communicator on board a satellite, for instance, that you're operating from Earth, then you can use your laptop and send a command, for instance, for that satellite to deorbit. That's one new application, and that's becoming more and more important, or to move your satellite, because like the FCC recently put out a new rule requiring the owners of satellites to have the capability to deorbit within a certain amount of time. So if you have one of our products attached to your satellite prior to launch, then that gives you a persistent communications connection to it. And just for instance, if you know that collision might be happening, or then you could move your space asset out of the way using commercial satellite networks.
Wow. And they can't do this today?
They do have communications on board satellites today, of course, and those are limited by being able to communicate to it when you're flying over a ground station. That's when you have the opportunity to interact with your satellite. Most of the Earth is covered with water, right? So you might have to wait quite a while before you can have that opportunity to communicate. And so the value proposition that Solstar brings to all this is that if you have the satellite link on your satellite, then you're able to communicate with it persistently, like almost any time you need to communicate to it, then you can do that if you have satellite connection on board your satellite.
Got it. Wow, that just is amazing. So, I mean, it sounds like this could really make a difference for the space junk challenge that we have. I mean, we hear a lot about all of the things that are still floating around in space. Some of those things are maybe not transmitting or being used anymore, but yet we haven't managed to get them out of orbit. So it sounds like this could really help with that.
Yeah, we think this is going to be a really big benefit of the services and the capabilities that we provide. Is that if you have a Solstar satellite device on your space asset, your spacecraft, your satellite prior to launch, then you have that constant communications with it. And whether you need to deorbit or, like you said, just avoid other potential collisions, you can move things out of the way to avoid potential collisions. And so we like to think that we're doing our part for helping to solve this really huge problem that's emerging, and we all have to do our best to do what we can to eliminate that problem. We all have to be responsible, and one of the ways that Solstar is doing that is that we're not going to be launching our own satellite network, because there are plenty of commercial satellite networks already available, and also new ones coming along. And so we're using existing infrastructure, emerging infrastructure, versus sending our own satellites into orbit.
That's great. It seems like that would really increase or decrease your time to market then to actually be commercially available, right?
That sounds good to me, and that's the idea.
Okay, great. So, what would you say are like some of the biggest changes or I guess new offerings that you'll be bringing to market over the next several years?
Well, we're working on a couple of categories. We're working on these Wi-Fi devices that are able to withstand the extreme environment of space. So we're working on two different versions of our Wi-Fi access points. We have one that would be mounted inside of space stations or spacecraft, which has to be radiation tolerant, because it is going to be receiving radiation even inside of the spacecraft. You don't get the extreme temperatures, luckily, when you're mounted inside, but they still need to be, they're specialty designed, and they're not available on the commercial market. And then if you're, say, providing the Wi-Fi on the lunar surface, then in fact you have these extreme temperature environments and extreme radiation that you have to design towards. And so those are two of the products that we're working on. And then on the satellite communications side, we're working on both a narrowband communicator and a broadband communicator that we call Slayton. Our narrowband offering, we're calling it DEKE, D-E-K-E, and this is named after one of NASA's first 7 astronauts, Deke Slayton, who was the head of the astronaut office over time, and he was kind of like the astronaut's astronaut. And he wasn't able to fly for a number of years because when he was selected, he was part of the Right Stuff astronauts. The doctors said he had a medical condition with his heart that kept him from flying, but fortunately he was able to fly on the Apollo Soyuz mission in 1975. And the reason why we're naming our products after him is because I actually, during spring break in college, I drove down to Houston to meet him when he was the head of a company called Space Services Incorporated. And that was the first private rocket company. So he didn't have any jobs available for me himself, but he made some phone calls for me or had contacts. And that's how I eventually got my job at NASA. So this is a tribute to this really, really great man.
Wow, what an amazing story. That's fantastic. So, as you probably know, the Mobile Satellite Users Association celebrated our 30-year anniversary last year. And I guess with that in mind, and with all this kind of future talk about what's happening in the industry, I would love to get your kind of one big prediction about what'll happen in the next 30 years.
So my big prediction is, of course, space communications related, since that's what we do. And so we obviously think this is going to continue to grow into a very, very important development with satellite services. So just being able to, so going from providing satellite services and internet in Earth orbit, all the way from, say low Earth orbit to farther up in orbit, then using commercial satellites in the lunar environment around the moon. We're going to see commercial satellite networks eventually around the moon, and then we can provide the same mobile satellite services on the moon as we do here on Earth. And then further out towards Mars, that will be the next one. And so I think we're just at the very beginning of this development, and who knows how it's eventually going to look, but I'm sure it's going to be a great vision.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Brian, thank you so much for making time to be here with us today. It was a really exciting conversation about where things are headed for on-orbit, space-based mobile communications.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. Keep up the good work at the MSUA.
Absolutely. And I do want to take just a moment to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. You can learn more about the MSUA at msua.org. And you can learn how you can get our weekly newsletter that gives you all the latest news on what's happening in the mobile satellite industry, as well as learn about our awards programs and how to become an MSUA member. So be sure to visit msua.org to learn more. And we'll see you next time on MSUA's Game Changers Live.